think for as long as I've been involved with the association, we've had 3 keynote speakers. We actually moved away from that model this year. We had a spoken word poet for the opening speaker, which was ridiculously fun, and more traditional kind of keynote speaker. But then our last thing, it was almost like a mini independent school TED Talk. And we had 3 different people from within our organizations. One was a head of school, and then 2 consultants who've kind of had different cool journeys, just talking about cool things they were doing. One of them was talking about how she took up karate, and at the end, she actually broke a board on her forehead.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today, I'm speaking with Debra Wilson, President of the National Association of Independent Schools, or NAIS. Debra, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Debra, tell us about NAIS.
NAIS is a membership organization. We have about 1,700 schools and a few hundred associations of varying types. We also have sponsors and other groups, but the schools are where we really focus. They're mostly domestic. We have some international independent schools. For those who don't know, we are a piece of the private school universe. So private schools, they educate about 11% of the kids in the United States, and independent schools, we're at like 1.7%. So we're a piece of that private school market. And you can generally tell independent schools from other private schools because they tend to be standalone schools. So we're not parochial schools, although we do have religious schools, and they're independently governed and independently funded. So to the extent they take state or federal funding, it's a pretty small piece of their overall financial picture. They're tuition driven, and they range in size pretty dramatically. I mean, they can be anywhere from 35 kids to 3,600 to 4,000 kids.
Oh my God.
It's hard to put them in a box, and, they are all over the country, and they come in all kinds of stripes.
Debra, let's dive into this a little bit. So my son goes to an independent school, but it's a religious school. It's Episcopal.
Yes.
Explain this to us a little bit. What makes them independent?
Yes, so they are independently governed. They all have boards. In our membership, they are all nonprofits, although you'll see some other, state or regional independent school associations that have for-profit schools. You see that particularly in Florida and in the Pacific Northwest. Those tend to pop up. And, in the case of like a religious school, it's not a parochial school. They don't tend to be owned by a church, although they might be connected to a church. But they are sort of able to find their own destiny. They have their own mission, vision, and values. And in the case of, a religious institution, it tends to align with, in your son's school's case, the Episcopal Church sort of writ large. But it by itself is a standalone entity, and it will have its own board of directors.
Meaning they decide the curriculum and they decide how to govern the school, as opposed to, say, a Catholic school, which isn't independent.
So the board won't have anything to do with curriculum. They won't have curriculum or programming, but they function more at like 30,000 feet. So they tend to be more kind of on the mission, vision, values, and the strategic future and the stewardship of the school for the long term. And the leadership team, so the head of school, say if you have like a dean of students or dean of faculty, associate head, that leadership group will be making more of the decisions around programming. But the programming will reflect, in your son's school's case, that Episcopalian sort of tradition and background and beliefs, as well as the school's mission, vision, and values.
So, Debra, if you've got small schools, large schools, probably rural, urban, suburban schools, religious and non-religious schools. My God, how do you marry their interests? What binds them together so that they're members of NAIS? Why do they join?
I mean, I think all of the schools are very well bounded on focusing on the student experience and really centering their work around kids and what they believe is best for kids, particularly in the developmental ages that we're looking at. So our schools are all, they can be pre-K. So you might see them go down, our Montessori schools go down to babies in some cases, all the way up through 12th grade or postgraduate. They might even have a postgraduate, pre-college year as well. And their purpose is around providing the best educational experiences they can. And that might look very different. I mean, one of the biggest joys of my job is to get to go to different campuses and see everything from, I have one school I'm dying to go see. They have a farm up on the roof of the school because it's in an urban area, which is so fun. Not a huge farm, but they have chickens and whatnot.
Wow.
Yeah, like in an urban environment. And then to go to other campuses that can be hundreds of acres out in rural areas. We've got a school in Vermont that, their art studios are old barns, beautiful light, beautiful spaces. And so, yeah, they're all very different, but they all really focus on that mission, vision, and values and meeting the unique space that they fill in their market. But it's all about the students.
Well, we got a lot to talk about when we talk about NAIS, but before we do that, let's talk about your journey. During the prep, you said that you're an accidental leader. So how'd you get to become president of NAIS?
So my journey at NAIS started a long time ago. I grew up in Connecticut. I went to an independent school, little school called the Williams School in New London, Connecticut. It's on the Connecticut College campus. As a small school, we had, I think, 38 kids in my graduating class. And then I went to college and law school, both in the South, but then I was in DC after law school. And I started off working at the Department of Justice. And I realized that just wasn't purposeful enough work for me. I was doing tax litigation, which is very interesting to my brain. I love code law. I love tax law. But I started thinking, what gives me purpose? What do I really want to do? And I'm a big fan of self-interventions. The idea that if something doesn't feel right, you put your feet down in the stream and you go figure out the thing that feels right. So when I was applying to positions, NAS was actually looking for somebody to do regulatory work. So if the IRS puts out new regulations, how do we help schools understand what that means in the school context? So I applied for the job and I was just really excited. I loved the people within the organization that I got to meet. And I'm from a big education family. My parents are both first generation to graduate from college. My grandparents were big proponents of education. And that's what I did. I kind of took the leap and said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And in fairly short order, I went from, doing regulatory affairs to becoming staff attorney and then ultimately to becoming general counsel. So I ended up staying with the organization for almost 19 years.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's a long time. And I always laugh. The person who became a friend when he interviewed me, he said, by the time you leave here, I want you to know how to run an association. And when I came back to NEIS, I said, you didn't tell me which association you were talking about on that day.
So you left NAIS and then came back?
I did. So kind of in the last, 10 years or so, I was at NEIS. I really branched out a bit. So I was still doing all of the legal work, but then I was really getting into governance. So how boards work with school leadership, like what all of that looks like. I co-wrote the book with actually my predecessor in this role, Donna Oram, which was great fun. And then I was doing a lot of work around student health and wellness because I think many of us have seen the data around what's happening with youth these days. So I was getting a lot of crisis calls from schools related to student anxiety and depression, suicidality. Like there was a lot of there. So I loved what I was doing, but I was really enjoying, as the scope of what I was taking on was broadening. And then the Southern Association of Independent Schools, which is an accrediting body, they had the presidency there opening up. And so I applied. So in 2019, I moved to SAIS, which is a wonderful organization, it's great schools. And I was there for 4 years, but then Donna announced her retirement. And so I applied for this job. So I started back at NEIS in the summer of 2023.
So you started at an independent school association, went to another one, and then came back to NAIS.
Sometimes you have to leave to come back again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Debra, what does it mean to be an accidental leader? Like you never thought you'd be a leader, but here you are? Or like, how do you think about leadership?
I find leadership kind of funny. I don't know anybody who starts off, at 14, it's like, I'm going to be the president of an association because I'm not even sure I understood the spectrum of association work until I got out of law school and really started looking and understanding that work. But for me, I just kept doing the next thing because I'm very purpose driven. So I was sort of following where my interests lies, not just in the membership that we serve and the work that we do in education, but also in how we're talking about the needs of our schools and helping them understand the complexities of what it's like to be in a school right now. So I kept kind of doing that until I realized like the next step is really becoming the president of an association. If I really want to talk about how all of these things, everything from the financial operations, because schools are businesses, independent schools are businesses, to how we think about student health and wellness and what the trends are there, to the challenges in the workforce, and even, the challenges of running schools during COVID. I certainly didn't set out to try to solve the COVID problem, but things come up and, we're here to help our schools. So sometimes I think when we talk about leadership, there's almost like an aura of mythology around it.
As in, people are born to be a leader, Yeah.
Exactly. Like you were touched magically on the head when you were in fourth grade.
And you don't believe this?
I don't believe that. I think everybody's got a leader in them. I think everybody actually does, in some capacity, have the ability to lead. And I worry sometimes we put so much pressure on, are you a leader? What does it mean to you to be a leader? That we actually miss the nuances and the subtlety into how different people lead. And it's wonderful to see, right? And again, I have the privilege of getting to go to many schools and seeing many different types of heads of schools and how they lead, how they bring their community together, all of the pieces that go into leadership. And there are so many different styles out there. When I think about leadership, I'm glad and privileged that I get to do it. But for me, it was like, okay, like what's the next thing that makes sense to me to bring more value and to take more care of our schools?
Well, how do you encourage your staff, for example, to become leaders? If you say that there's a leader in everyone, how do you encourage the new hire who might be 23 or someone who's been doing help desk for 10 years or someone who's been running conference for 10 years? How do you let them know that maybe they're episodic leaders or emerging leaders? How do you cultivate that?
Yeah, I think giving people runway to do the things. I had the great fortune of working with Pat Bassett at NAS for a long time. He was an NAS president for, I think, 13 or 14 years. And his whole theory was let the fastest horses run. I don't even think we had to be fastest. Like, just if you wanted to run, like he was game to support you in doing that. I mean, and he wasn't reckless in it, but just that ability to own your work and to see the next level and to give people that space to do it. And I think you can do that at any level in any organization. So we do try to do that at NAIS. Like any organization, we're probably more successful sometimes than other times, but I really think that that is the key to give people those opportunities. And as they build confidence and they build experiences, it leads to the next thing.
Well, let's turn to NAIS. You just held your annual conference in Nashville, and it's called Thrive. Love that. What kind of changes did you make to the conference? Because I talk to execs all the time who say, we have got to reinvent our conference. So did you make changes this year?
Yeah, so this is actually the second year that we've called the conference Thrive. Before that, we referred to it as the annual conference. We changed themes, we did this, we did that. And then we just said, you know what, we're going to call it Thrive. And we're going to keep the branding fairly similar year after year so people know what that is. So that was a change we made actually going into last year. And then this year, we really wanted to mix it up. Nashville's a fun place to have a conference. The convention center is beautiful. One of the big changes we made, like a lot of conferences, we have an exhibit hall. And we just decided, like after last year, we were like, this just isn't capturing the flavor of the association. Is this the best way we could be serving the supporters of the association? So vendors who come in, different subscribers, sponsors, all kinds of things, people who are in the exhibit hall. And is this a place, like, is this a fun place for people from our schools to go? So we renamed it the Quad.
Oh, cute, because a lot of universities have a quad.
Well, actually, and a lot of our schools have a quad. So it was fun. And we have a coaches corner. So we have executive coaches available right there. We moved a lot of learning and hands-on opportunities into the quad. And then we had fun things like table shuffleboard, which is one of my favorite things. We had ping pong. We always have student bands or groups at the conference. So they might be like opening for a general session speaker. We had some of the student bands play afterwards in the quad. We had a Dolly Parton impersonator in there. Like, we just did all kinds of fun stuff like that,
Wow.
just to liven it up.
So you made it the place to be, just like a real quad.
Yes.
And what was the reaction?
Oh, it was great. I think any of the vendors who were in the hall, the feedback has been wonderful. They really enjoyed it. They appreciated it. They appreciated that we were mixing it up. And I think the school people really appreciated that there were like just different things to do there. It felt a little more casual, a little more kind of just natural socializing between members, but also, with the vendors who were in there to learn more about what they were doing. And then, of course, any kind of hands-on learning technology stuff is just lots of fun. So it was definitely more the place to be. And I think we'll continue doing that next year.
Now, are you continuing to rethink the conference? Like, what's on tap for 2026?
Well, every year our program team always has something new cooking. So actually this year we moved away I think for as long as I've been involved with the association, we've had 3 keynote speakers. We actually moved away from that model this year. We had a spoken word poet for the opening speaker, which was ridiculously fun, and more traditional kind of keynote speaker. But then our last thing, it was almost like a mini independent school TED Talk. And we had 3 different people from within our organizations. One was a head of school, and then 2 consultants who've kind of had different cool journeys, just talking about cool things they were doing. One of them was talking about how she took up karate, and at the end, she actually broke a board on her forehead. But it was kind of about purpose and joy. It was just a fun thing to do. The other thing we did was we did what we called an insights panel, where we had the executive directors or other senior leaders from a variety of associations who serve our schools. So people there are from a big testing organization, from the business officers organization, from the advancement organization. It was actually fabulous. It was like a speed talk. So you only had 3 minutes to present your trend and kind of thoughts about the trend.
Wow.
And we had people at rounds. We broke it into like 2 parts. So 3 people spoke first. And then we threw a question out to the folks in the room to have conversations at their table, and then kind of popcorn that out, and then did a second round of that. And the room was packed, and we got great feedback on that too. People enjoyed both hearing about the trends from these organizations, who have these sort of specialized interests, and then getting to network and really talk to people at their table around particular ideas. And then we used an app to do questions and answers and that kind of thing. So it was great fun. So hopefully we'll continue that. And, we might do a couple rounds of variations on that, because it's a great way, instead of sitting and getting, like, you're sitting and getting some, but you're also engaging. And it was a fun format. We do a reception one evening. We started to take that off site. And so I think Nashville might win on that score. We were on a rooftop, and there was a band, and people were line dancing, and it was fun.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you completely reimagined the conference. We'll have to have you back so you can tell us about, the next conference. But I want to talk about something totally different, but also kind of in the vein of reinvention. You just moved into new office space in DC.
Yes.
What did you do? Because I feel like anybody moving these days is kind of not just moving into a new space, but they're like reimagining what that space is going to be and do and represent.
Yeah. So we'd been in our old office space probably closing in on 10 years. And we only moved a block away, but in DC post-pandemic, that allowed us to save money just in and of itself. And we actually shrunk the footprint of our office a little bit. And we moved away from everybody having office space, or at least a cubicle. So we made that shift because a lot of people are mostly virtual.
So you didn't make them come back?
No. We do like magnet days and things. So I am a believer that people should physically get together periodically because I think it just builds different kinds of relationships. But on a daily basis, we don't have the majority of staff in the office. And then the space itself, so we created in that space, again, it's smaller footprint, but then larger, basically a conference room, but it's big enough we can hold institutes there. So we can host, I think, up to 75 people in that space in rounds. And it's lovely because we do have windows. I know you have a lot of association listeners, and I know they've also spent time eating rubber chicken and being in a room with no windows and very little natural light. And this space has a pretty good sized kitchen, a couple different coffee machines. So we can host institutes in there now, which is great because it cuts down. Hotels have gotten so expensive for various institutes, and we're always aware that our members are nonprofits. A lot of our members are smaller schools, so we try our absolute best to keep our costs in line. And we weren't able to do this in our old office space. So we just moved in March of 2024. We've been doing it for about a year, and it's been good fun. We have stairs that go up to a rooftop deck, which is now being completed, so people can use that outside space. And then the rest of the office space has different singular office spaces that people can reserve for an hour or two. There's breakout room spaces. So when we do institutes, a lot of times we'll have the whole group together, but then we'll do work in smaller groups, and this office provides a space to do that. It's very homey. It feels very school-like. We actually have student artwork up all over the office.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, it's very fun. So to remind us that that is in fact what we do. We are supporting schools, and it's a lovely space, and it's worked out really well. And it's really the first space that we've built to host institutes, to host people coming from schools directly to our office. We've never, other than the NAIS board, we've never really had a ton of school people coming to our offices before. So now with these institutes, and I think last year we did maybe 4 or 5 different events up there, including a couple of receptions and things. And so, yeah, that's been a big positive for us over the last year.
I'm thinking about your quad at the conference and now thinking about the office. It sounds like you're creating space to gather.
Yes.
Interesting. So as a staff, as well as a membership and as an association, by inviting more members to come into your space, it sounds like.
Yeah, we absolutely are doing that. And trying to be really intentional about the purpose behind our gathering. The conference room space is very flexible in terms of how you set up tables, what all of that looks like. There's no real front of the room. If you're speaking in there, you're actually kind of better off speaking in the middle because slides will show on whiteboards on either side. And the actual doors, so they're glass walls. So when you walk right in, you can see the glass walls into the conference room, but those actually sort of accordion open. So that can be created as a total open space into the kitchen and things. So we think a lot about how we use the space, what we're doing. If we do a strategy lab, we use it differently than we would a regular institute. We put a lot of thought into how are we coming together? Why are we coming together? What are our objectives? And school people come to our offices that they know it's an NAIS space. So everything is kind of the same every time, where their badges are, where they find things, just to make it a place where people can really come and feel centered and focus on the reason they're there.
Well, Debra, in addition to Rethinking Conference and the office space, you also rebranded last year.
Yeah, we've been busy.
You have been. So tell us about that. What did the rebrand look like?
Yeah, so our old brand had been tweaked a couple times, I think, over the last, it predated me. So probably the last time we did a real rebrand was 30 years ago. And I was a big fan of this because I was tired of looking at the same old colors. And we had block letters. It looked very Education Association, circa 1992 or 3. And it was lovely for its time, but it was just time. And, we decided with leadership transition and everything, yeah, let's lean into this too. And we have a wonderful marketing and communications team. We worked with a great outside firm and, really did the work. We did some surveys, we did some focus groups, just got a lot of input that started to give us good guidance in terms of what are schools looking at us for, where can we be most helpful to our schools, but also kind of using that to inform how we thought about what our brand should look like and feel like.
But Debra, did the mission change?
No.
Or are you giving it more of an aesthetic upgrade?
So it's an aesthetic upgrade, but it also sort of informed how we think about our goals. We know schools are looking to us to be an authority on best practices in our field or informed practices in our field. They're looking for us to keep them informed about kind of the everyday things that happen in schools. They're looking for us to create a network for them to come together. Like they're very distinct buckets they're looking for in our work. So it helped give a little bit more shape and formation there too, which sounds like a lot to put behind a rebranding, right?
But it's why you do a rebrand.
It is why you do a rebrand. So it was very helpful and just insightful work. And it updated our look, it updated our colors, and it kind of worked really well with just moving into a fresh office. And there's a lot of new going on, which is fun.
Well, what else is new in 2025 or that will be new?
I think we got so excited about that we're leaning into doing some strategic planning now.
Oh, that is new.
Yeah, so we'll see where that goes. Building off the good work that we did around the brand, because some of that will definitely inform this work and we'll continue to use that going forward. But it had been a while since the association engaged. I wouldn't even call this necessarily traditional strategic planning, but just really hearing from across the membership. I mean, sort of where we started this conversation, we have such varied schools from just urban, rural, suburban,
Right.
going up into Canada. Like, we've got all kinds of things going on. And so, like, how do we get our hands on where the whole association is now and what does that look like? So we're engaging in that work this year, which is fun and exciting work because it's been a very long time since we've done it. We've done other work. We've done jobs to be done work. We've done some mission, vision, values work, but we haven't engaged with the membership quite this way in quite some time, other than the branding work we did last year.
So you're going into the strategic planning process with an open mind about where you should go based on what the members say. So you don't know yet where you're going.
No, I mean, I think we have some feelings. Like, again, we did some of this legwork last year on the branding work.
I see, of course.
So we're looking for that input and working with our board, and it's going to be good. It's certainly not boring.
Well, Debra, it's March 2025, and I know that parents are always in the spring thinking about the next school year. And so if I'm a parent thinking about school for my child, why should I consider an independent school?
I think it's totally based on the child. You might be in a place where you have fabulous public schools, whether they're regular public schools or charter schools or magnet schools. You might have a religious day school that's interesting to you, but then kind of looking beyond and saying, okay, what other school choices do we have? Independent schools tend to be pretty unique in that they have the ability to be a little bit more nimble than a lot of their peers. And they often have a different community feel. They do cost money. They are tuition-driven schools. But at the same time, you'll often find that they're very different from your other options locally, your other traditional options. So it's worth going into it with an open mind. The number of friends I've had who never thought they'd send their kids to boarding school, they'd call me and they'd be nervous and they'd say, we're going to go tour boarding schools. I don't know if I'm going to like this. And I said, you call me when you get back. I said, they are amazing places.
Right.
And you're going to be kind of jealous at the thought of, like, you're probably going to actually want to go back to school. And there are not many adults I know who want to relive their teen years. And our day schools are the same way. They just provide a different kind of educational experience because, they do also have the privilege of being a bit more flexible and a bit more nimble and saying, like, okay, like, what is the purpose of education? What are we doing with these kids and what world are they going to be graduating into? And how do we prepare them for that? And so they're incredibly unique and special places. And I highly encourage anybody to just broaden their aperture a little bit and just go check them out. They're very friendly places. The tours are fun and interesting. And I encourage people to give them a shot because it's just a different kind of experience.
Well, Debra, we'll put a link in the show notes because you have a number of really fabulous resources for parents, for trustees, and for parents who are maybe thinking about a school and how to find one.
Absolutely, we do.
Debra, this has been a fun and just amazing interview. Thank you for sharing all the ways that you're reinventing NAIS. I hope you'll come back next year and tell us about the year that you've had, because I think all this change is going to continue.
Yeah, I think we're going to keep rolling along, but thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. You know, my personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!